Hello and welcome to another edition of the Kipper stream. Today is another celebrity interview. We have our very special guest back, the only guest to have ever returned. That is Mr. Richard Braine. How are you doing, Richard?
Very well, thank you for having me on the show.
So, what have you been up to lately?
Well, we've had a very busy couple of weeks doing hustings, and it was an insane schedule because in mathematics there's a problem that was quite famous called the traveling salesman problem. And the problem is you've got, let's say, 50 cities on a map, and how do you work out the shortest distance between them? And it turns out that it's actually a very, very complicated problem. And it was only solved, I think, I don't know, 10 or 20 years ago, using some iterative mathematics. And so this is a very difficult problem. UKIP seems to have solved the traveling salesman problem in reverse, because they've seem to have found an algorithm for defining the longest route between any collection of cities. So we had the 12 cities in the order that maximize journey length and expenditure and inconvenience. And in fact, sadly, I hoped I was going to get 100% attendance record, but on Friday, I had a plane cancelled at the airport at Gatwick. I then went to Stansted to get a subsequent plane to Belfast, and that plane was cancelled too. So I had 2 planes cancelled in one afternoon, and I failed, unfortunately, to get to the Belfast hustings. It's the only one I didn't attend on time.
Well, I saw your video of that, actually, Richard, and I thought it was quite good, actually. So why don't we go straight into the thick of it? In that video, you actually, well, first of all, you were with some woman who I think had some kind of flowery necklace that she was trying to put over you. Is that right? That's
right. Well, in fact, when I got back to Liverpool Street from Stansted, I thought, I was very frustrated, having gone to 2 airports for 2 flights and so on. And so I went into the pub. There was a pub there, and a friend of mine who went for his 3rd degree, I think, went to Buckingham University. He took me to a pub there once where they had topless barmaids on a Wednesday night, I think it was. I don't know why Wednesday was such a great night, but that was the night. And anyway, this pub by Liverpool Street Station, I think it was called, I'm going to give it a plug. It was, because I liked it, was called, I think, the Railway Tavern, I think it was called. But anyway, they had the barmaids and barmen. The barmen were wearing grass skirts, and the barmaids, they were all wearing garlands and so on. And it's funny because I've been talking about garlands in the few days beforehand, because some of the other leadership candidates and some people in UKIP seem to believe that if we reverse direction and become, a politically correct party, basically a sort of Brexity version of the Lib Dems. They seem to believe that then the BBC is going to really like us, and the Guardian's going to start writing nice articles about UKIP, and everybody's going to rehabilitate us and put garlands around our necks for being such good little politically correct people. And such a good little party that does what it's told. And of course, it's nonsense. It's not going to be like that. They hate us, and they're going to hate us forever. They always did, and they always will. And so I think the point about it is that we mustn't imagine that somehow retreating from the party's current manifesto or position on many things, that somehow that's going to win us popularity or accolades. I don't think that's going to happen. UKIP has always been a party of rebellion and saying the unsayable things. It's always been a party that was prepared to cause offense and shake people up and change the world in a very courageous, if not always very popular way. So I think that we need to stick with that. There aren't going to be any garlands around our necks.
Well, I suppose the follow-up question to that would be, if we're not going to be changing any of our core beliefs, how will we try and attract and get our poll numbers up? Because obviously we're not doing very well at the moment. Are there new policies you'd like to see put in, or a different approach perhaps? How would you, with the same manifesto, get us back up to where we could be?
I actually think, okay, so from the point of view of policy, I don't think there's that much that we need to change in our existing manifesto. I think it needs, first of all, the full-length manifesto needs more detail. We also need a digest manifesto that's much shorter, so people can read, 2 pages or 3 pages, so that it's really quick and they can get a feel for what the party's about. So I would like to have a short version of the manifesto and a longer version of the manifesto, with the longer one having more detail. I've talked before about having a digital Bill of Rights. I think that that would be a great manifesto pledge, that we're going to look into this issue of privacy and the extraordinary level of intrusion into our private lives by lots of companies and governments and so on. So that's an area where I'd like to see policy develop. But the main thing is, and I've spoken of this in the hustings many times, is that I think that we need to have a policy forum where people in the party can openly discuss these matters, and when there are very obvious policies that the members like, then they will be heavily upvoted, and it will be very easy for the leadership and the NEC to look at suggested policies and see what the membership wants to do about it. So that, I think, is the number one promise. All of the candidates have said we need to listen to the grassroots more, but in fact, as far as I'm aware, I haven't really seen any kind of concrete plans for how to achieve that. And of course, our failure to use the internet for this is a big problem. We're all getting better at it. Look at us now, having a conference video, great. But what we really need is, we need an old, a Reddit or Slashdot type system where people can actually make suggestions, and those suggestions will be voted on by members, and we'll be able to see pretty quickly which policies and suggestions are popular and unpopular.
Well, I heard you speak about this at the Southeast Conference officers meeting, and you spoke about the glory system, I think you called it. Did you want to unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, glory, it's just a word I chose slightly humorously, I think. The idea is that, you'll have a score. In the old Slashdot days, it was called karma. Again, somewhat tongue-in-cheek. But the idea is that your peers can upvote your suggestions, your comments, your ideas, and you can also gain points by, let's say, going out and canvassing and using the online canvassing system. You would also get points for standing for the party or being an election agent. And I also think a donation system for points as well would be effective, because certainly, when people would be able to buy more voice, and the party needs money. So let's the idea that you have one fixed membership and everybody pays that is fine. But some people have got more money to give, others have got less money to give. And so, let's make sure that people can give, and when they do give, they get something back. So I don't have a problem with people actually buying, let's say, a very limited amount of glory, so that you can't just come in and dominate the whole thing with a lot of money. But certainly, for small donations, allowing people to gain a little bit to gain some glory points. And your glory rating would be visible, and people would get competitive about it, as I suggested before. And so, and people would show it to each other, and they would hopefully go out and canvass and do good work for the party with this very specific reward system. And of course, it gives you a whole host of possibilities in terms of, monthly prizes, and, when conference comes, having prizes, or having people talk about, how they gained lots of glory points and so on, and how they use it. So in other words, it's just trying to make a kind of a currency of UKIP virtue, I think is the point. A currency for UKIP virtue, so that people can, feel that their efforts for the party are at least acknowledged and even rewarded with some kind of bonus or privilege or power to make things happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for me anyway. So.
Yeah, I had a question on your software, because I had a question a chap wanted me to ask out, Neil James Rivet, and he was asking, with the software you're developing, is there an aspect of it which would allow ease of members being able to talk branch to branch? Because the complaint he was making that his sorry, I'm being interrupted.
Hi, Mom.
Who's that?
Put a sign on the door. Go. Fuck off. Jesus, I'm so terrible. Sorry.
Hi, Mom. Perfect.
One day I'll get through a stream without that happening.
Okay, branches chatting to each other.
Yes. Anyway, yeah, he was complaining that his branch doesn't talk to the other branches well enough, or his chairman doesn't do enough. He was wondering, would your software allow you the option to talk to other branches with ease, and that so easier for communication?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's the point about the idea of a policy forum is, one, it would be open to all members, that log in, and two, that, on that policy forum, they will find people, and, who have expertise in the areas that they're interested in. And the consequence of that is that, people will come to rely on the forum when they've got a problem they need solving. And it won't matter if the person who has the answer to the question is in your neighboring branch or is at the other end of the country. You'll just log in, you fire a question in, and people will try and help you and answer you. And so from that point of view, it's look, we've been doing this on the internet for decades now, but the party isn't doing it. People are using email. Okay, email's fine if you've got the email address of the person that you want to speak to. That's great. Then there were email lists with listserv and all of that, and that worked great. But in many ways, what we need is the party's own social media system, which is what I'm really talking about. It's going to be a forum. It's going to have moderators. It's going to have this, some kind of voting virtue system that, as I've described, so that you'll be able to up and down vote the comments and suggestions of others. And it's going to be very important that people can go through the content on the site saying, I only want to see things that have had more than 5 upvotes. And that will mean that you've got a filter in place so that when you'll be able to look at the site and really skim off the high quality stuff that everybody has said is good. And that's going to save a lot of time. But of course, it will have search as well, because it's just going to be database. So you'll be able to search answers. So a lot of the time, probably what you'll find is that people will have a problem. They'll go onto the forum and they'll just search for the thing that they want to discuss, and mostly it will have already been discussed, and they'll be able to just look through the previous discussion and have an answer that way. But also, like any comment system, people can answer if they're there and they have the knowledge to do so. So I think that a system like that is pretty simple to write. There are thousands of them online. There's every kind of it's been done a million times. It's nothing new, but that's what the party needs, I think, to solve this problem of I've got a question, who can I speak to? That's really the problem that we have. The party has been kind of paranoid about data and GDPR and all that sort of stuff. The point about having a forum like this is that the people that go onto it are doing it willingly. So they are essentially immediately giving their permission, to be on there. So you get around all of that thing of one branch's email addresses not being shared with another branch because of the party's paranoia about the database.
Yeah, because one thing I've been thinking about, and I don't know if anybody would be on board with this, but I think sometime in the future, integrating something like YI into the main UKIP website and just have like a full-on forum section to the UKIP website would be a good idea. Because I think the problem with Facebook is that it is great for big forum chats, but it has too many risks of leaks, in my opinion. And I think having a more integrated system would be better.
Absolutely, that's really right. And don't forget that. Look, I mean, Facebook is a bit of a mess, really, if we're honest about it. The other problem is, that you're trusting a third party. In the case of a party of UKIP running a database comments forum like this, the party would own the data, not Facebook. And so certainly you can expect, a higher degree of privacy because you expect people on there to be UKIPers. Now, that's not to say that the Sun newspaper won't manage to infiltrate successfully. Of course they will. So it's going to be important to have a good kill switch system so that if someone really tries to sabotage it, they're going to be able, that a bad comment that shouldn't be seen is going to get zapped pretty quickly. That's the point. We'll have moderators. You could even have votes for moderators so that people on the forums could choose, could actually elect moderators. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think as long as the software is sensibly designed, it will be pretty rapid removal of the things that we don't want there. And that will be by consensus. And the whole idea here is that you make the system, you make the software so that it runs itself, so that volunteers are basically running it all. It's just people, UKIP members, going on and doing a sensible job of communicating, and to some extent policing each other's behaviour and making sure that things don't go too crazy.
Well,
now I know there's a particular problem here with YI, because we know that YI people can go quite far towards the edge of acceptability, and that's fine. Young people do. I mean, I did terrible things when I was young. I'm not going to go any further on that, but so the point is, I think that in a way, I think that having a separate YI area isn't necessary. People in YI will be able to start a thread that is about, I don't know, Minecraft or memes of some kind or whatever it is, and that will be they'll be able to chat in there if you're interested. But I don't think we need to have I've talked before about the boomer millennial bridge and making sure that the youngsters and the old people in the party actually fraternize and get to know each other and help each other with their sort of unique takes on things. Well, this is a place where that bridge can happen. This is a place where young and old alike will communicate and will talk to each other. I think the more of that mixing happens, the better. So I mean, part of the whole cultural Marxist era, and you look at the Soviets and the Nazi socialists, the whole thing was you get the young people indoctrinated so that they report their parents. So if we have any unacceptable behavior in their parents, clinging to silly old ideas like the family and so on, they'll be reported by their children and go to the gulag. And actually that really did happen in the Soviet Union, and there was a conscious desire in the promotion of socialism in the second half of the 20th century to actually intersectionalize the relationship between grandchildren and grandparents, between children and parents, so that there was a war not just between the worker and the and the management, but there was a war, of course. Actually, funny enough, the Soviet Union was quite good on feminism and the relation between women and men, but certainly there were problems with the relation between the different age groups. We need to break that down. When young and old people get together, it is something wonderful, and it should be something wonderful. Young people should realize how much they can learn from old people who have so much experience and have so much to tell them about the past, which is so informative. And old people, of course, look at young people and see the energy and the enthusiasm and the desire to ask difficult questions. And these days, of course, the knowledge about technology and and how to do things incredibly quickly and efficiently. So that's it. I think that can be a beautiful relationship. And I would argue that if you have a really good forum that's working in the way I've described, then don't segregate by age. Let people muck in and get together and build. That's how you unify a culture and build a really great synthesis of ages and ideas. Symbiosis. So my instinct would be to not have a specific YI area, just have an area where everybody can go in, follow their interests, and get together.
Yeah. Well, Richard, I actually spoke to, I don't know if you know Toby Micklethwaite.
Yes.
Recently, and I said I was going to interview you, and he had questions about your canvassing app, actually.
Yes.
One of the questions he asked was, are you going to need the membership lists from the council, and how do you plan to put in the info? Will you have to match the membership lists with the info you've collected, and couldn't that be quite complicated?
Okay, so let me just see if I can work my way through your question. So we're not talking about a membership list. We're talking about the electoral register, which is supplied to parties by the local authority. But let's also talk about the UKIP's membership list, because that's another question. So, but now, first of all, your local authority will supply the electoral register, and what we're going to have is we're going to have an upload button. So people that have upload privileges for a particular branch or in a particular area, they will be able to just choose a constituency or a ward and hit the upload data button. and you just feed it a CSV file. Some local authorities provide the data as Excel files instead of CSV, but so I think for the moment the end user, because the Excel file format is a movable feast and a pain in the ass, what will happen is that all that you'll be required to do is open the Excel file, save it as CSV, and then hit the upload button, and you will then upload the values. And then what will happen is the database will crunch through it, and it will try its best to match the electoral register that you've got with any previous version of the electoral register that you have. Now, there's quite a bit of complexity here. I've been thinking it all through and working on it. So different local authorities work in different ways. Some of them provide you update lists, which are quite small files, maybe 1,000 to 2,000 people. These are the updates to our electoral register since 2018 or whatever it is, and it will be people who've either left or moved to the area, or who are deceased, or for whatever reason are actually changes to the database. So the database software is going to need to be clever, and I've put quite a bit of thinking into this, but it just needs to be clever enough to look at the files uploaded and analyze the data and behave appropriately. It's not impossible that it might ask a question or two about the data you've uploaded. So once the file's uploaded, it may say, can you confirm that column 3, which says M/D, is moved or deceased? Okay, so there's an example of the kind of question it might ask, just to make sure that it uses the data properly. The voter is actually defined by a voter number, the first part of which is called the PD, the postal district, and that's really the polling district, which is pretty much the same as a postcode, or part of the postcode. And then there's an elector number, which is which is the next bit of data for each voter. And your elector number changes pretty much every election, because they just renumber the list. So obviously that's not your key into the database. And most local authorities provide very limited data. You don't get email, phone numbers, or anything like that. You just get name, address, and PD and ENO, and sometimes information about whether you've moved or whatever it is. So the database is going to use name, and I'm going into quite a lot of detail here, but I'm trying to make sure that I answer this thoroughly so that we deal with all the questions. So the database is going to use actually name and address and postcode to identify duplicates. So if you're called John Smith and you move from your address, and someone moves into your address and he's also called John Smith, then there is a potential that will produce a false positive, and we've got a problem then. The only problem that could occur then is that the previous John Smith's canvassing data, in other words, questions that he's previously answered to a canvasser about which way he's going to vote, will then get attributed to the new John Smith, who's a different John Smith. So that obviously will be quite rare, and it's better to just, the Unix way is that you say, look, we could get so hung up on the intricacies of this, let's just solve 90% of the problem, steam ahead. And then, if we come across anomalies and difficulties later down the line, we'll solve them as if they become serious. So that's what I plan to do: steam ahead by simply using name and address as the key in the database to carry over previous canvassing data each time a new electoral register is submitted into the database. Sorry, say again.
I was going to say, before we move off technology, I wanted to bring Kentley in at some point, since he is a software developer.
Yeah. By the way, I'm 51. So I'm seriously over the hill. So if I'm speaking in a language, I haven't mentioned punch cards yet, but we're talking about an old timer here. But I do write this stuff. I do database architecture. I do have a fairly good understanding of how this all works, and I write it myself. So and I've put some thought into how we program all of this.
Well, the main question I've got, that I've got a few that I was thinking about. The one I really want to ask is whether or not you would, how much sort of a push would you make against any sort of resistance in the party to try and weaken the amount of data protection that we got going on, because I've approached the same from the other side, and there's a lot of resistance. I've been trying to get a branch list, and I've jumped through maybe 3 hoops at the moment, and there's no end to that in sight, just to get a regional branch list. So yeah, I just wonder, would you try and push against the amount of restrictions they've got on data protection to try and get more creativity, more ideas, more development going on in the party? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the only issue here is simply that we need to comply with the law.
Oh yeah, of course.
Now, that's it. And oops, sorry, something just fell on the phone. So yeah, I mean, that's it. That is the only sort of serious requirement, and I don't see much of a problem in that regard. We simply navigate the new rules and make sure that we're compliant with them. And don't forget, it's electoral law as well as GDPR. But I don't think we'll have a problem. And so, I would say that doesn't trouble me. We know that there are exemptions from GDPR in the case of political parties doing local campaigning, for instance. So there are specific rules where you're allowed to do this, that, and the other. So the point is, you look at GDPR, it is restrictive, it is a pain in the neck, but I don't see a problem with us managing to to live within it and still do these things that I'm talking about. We're allowed to get this electoral data. It is provided by local authorities to us because we're a political party, and so let's use it. Let's make the most of it. Let's do what the other parties are doing and do it even better. Let's do it even better than other parties. Let's have the coolest, fastest, simplest, best interface systems for users to go out and get this data, and let's incentivize them to get the data so that we really start to build up a good body of information quickly about where our support really is. And let's contact those people who do support us, and let's get them to join the party. And all of this problem is going to be so much quicker and easier to solve if we're actually using technology that's existed for 20, 30 years.
You've got my agreement in that, definitely. I was just going to ask as well whether or not, it is a bit of a technical question, but have you considered whether or not you'd want to set up some sort of API that could be connected to by obviously authorized parties, but one that could be used by, say, your forum, an API that would authorize or authenticate would be the word, UKIP members, to allow basically a platform, a way for us to allow platforms to verify whether someone is or isn't a UKIP member?
Yes. Okay. So I've given this, obviously I've had to deal with this question before, and I caused a stink last summer when I had a chat with the guy at the firm that actually runs the UKIP membership database. And there's enormous aversion to changing anything. And quite frankly, this is probably, I think, maybe the number one reason to vote for me, is because that is precisely what we need to do. This system of a forum, of a canvassing system, leaflets, the glory rating, all of that needs to connect to the API on the existing member database, so that we actually have a connection between the existing member database and how much canvassing data they put in, what they say on the forum, all of that, so that it's fully integrated. With databases, the most important thing is that there's only one of it.
Yeah.
So it's like, I can't remember who it was who said, was it Watson or somebody said that the joke was that I think he was one of the Intel guys who said, one day there could be as many as 5 computers in the world, and that was regarded as an extraordinarily fanciful idea, and then all of this happened the last sort of 40 years, and I think it was Vince Cerf, or one of the engineering task force members, who said, what's funny about that comment is basically that he overestimated the number by 4. It is turning into one. It is the one. It's the network. That's what it has become, and we need to make sure that our system integrates properly like that, so that we're not messing around. So yes, and my guess is that there is an API already for the parties database system. By the way, my battery might run out in a minute. I hope it won't, but looking at measures now to try to avoid that happening. But where was I? Yeah, so yeah, that's absolutely the idea is to have an API on the existing members database, and that's how it will all connect.
Well, Gerard, sorry, not Gerard, Richard, at risk of you losing battery, I think we should talk about Gerard. And wait, is he there? Or is he frozen?
I think he's frozen sideways on, sort of.
He seems to.
I see like a part of his head.
Must be a battery's gone, I'm sure.
Oh dear. Okay, we need some fill time. What should we talk about?
It's funny, I was just putting in the chat about this glory system. I think it's fantastic. I think there should be bonuses to people who wake up early to put in the work. So we'll call that morning glory. And what we don't want is we don't want people stealing other people's glory. So if you break the system, if you cheat, whatever, then all of your glory points get flushed down the glory hole. I think that would be fantastic.
One of the things I like a lot about it is when it comes to the NEC and things like that, the elections, there's going to be more merit to people who have higher glory, which will give them the greatest chance of getting on the NEC, which means I think it'll be more of a meritocracy. You won't just get people who happen to have a lot of friends in UKIP and will get a lot of votes. You have to earn your
my current, I mean, I'll be honest, my current knowledge of how the system runs is pretty limited. But from what I do know, it sounds almost reminiscent of how the House of Lords works. And that where it's about more about just like who you know and just how long you've sat in position for, as opposed to how much work you've actually put in. I mean, I could be completely wrong on that, but it's not something that's explained very well, is to my knowledge.
I went for prospective parliamentary candidate once, and that was, to be fair, that was done quite democratically. I was quite young. We had a meeting with all of the committee members from the local constituency and had a vote, and I very narrowly lost. I think that's the way it works with most elections. What I think is good about this system, and I think glory is a bad name, but what I think is good about the system, it doesn't matter about the name. What I think is good about the system is it's really great to have a tangible number you can put in front of people, because it's all well and good saying, I've been here for 5 years, but if you haven't done anything in the 5 years and you've canvassed maybe once a year, you're not really putting in the same work that someone who's been here 6 months, but is on the street every weekend putting in the work. So I think having that quantifiable, tangible number would be extremely valuable to committees and to constituencies when they're choosing who their candidate should be.
Yeah, I mean, the whole system, like the whole arbitrary number system, it's a little old-fashioned, but I think if used the right way, it can be useful, because it'll at least give you an indicator of what people think of other members and how much work that member has put into the pie. And like, so whether if somebody has a really good idea in that, like how much trust can you put in that opinion and that, or in that idea?
Yeah, I think it will definitely serve to incentivize activists as well.
Yeah. It'll get people on the street because they want to get more points, obviously. Yeah,
I think I'm not sure I like the phrasing glory. I think service would be a better way to put it. You know, service guarantees citizenship. So
brilliant.
Yeah, that's not bad. I quite like that.
2 service points for you, sir.
Yeah, I would say loyalty points, but then I just think of my Nectar card.
Yeah, we're not Sainsbury's. We are UKIP.
Yeah.
I do think that. Sorry, go on. I do think that the idea bears a lot of promise, because it's not the first person I've heard.
Hello?
It's not the first person I've heard to suggest that.
Hi, are you trying to join back on?
I think I must have joined at the wrong time, because all I heard was merger with Sainsbury's, and then Kentley say we've been trying this for a long time, and I'm pretty sure that's not what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you heard that.
You should be able to click the link.
This is extremely professional. I love this stream. Yeah, click the one that says link. Oh my word. Damien, mute your mic. Damien, mute your mic.
Okay.
Damien, we can have a conversation without you, but we can't do it if your mic's off.
All right,
Sorry, that was Richard calling me, trying to get back on.
Right.
Pro tip: press Control D on your computer to mute your mic.
Am I sideways? I'll just tilt my head.
Amazing.
How about that?
So I want to ask you guys, what do you think will happen? Because the voting's happening in the next few days, and we'll find out who our leader is, I imagine, in a matter of weeks. In terms of what we hope, I think I can tell roughly what each of you would like, but what do we think's actually going to happen? I mean, from what I've seen, there seems to be a lot of support behind Ben Walker, and I'm pretty sure he'll win.
Yeah, among certain people in Young Independents, which I don't think a very big majority of people.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have Richard back, so let's not waste time whilst he's still with us. Richard, okay, he appears to be driving.
Yeah, I'm not driving.
Oh, okay. Oh,
my wife is driving.
Richard, one of the big parts of your campaign is your loyalty to Gerard and how you are basically taking his place for the fact that he's not able to stand. Do you want to elaborate on that position?
Well, yes. I mean, first of all, I think that there's a narrative. I've said this, tweeted it, and so on. But there's a narrative growing up that that the party's done badly because of Gerard. I don't agree with that narrative. First of all, I don't think there would be a party if it weren't for Gerard at the moment. And the other thing is that if you look at our election performance, let's say in the decade before, so 2000 to 2010, let's say, and if you look at our performance straight after the referendum, there's a shark fin shape. We bumbled along on a very low percentage, and then there was this surge in 2010 to 2013. We had a surge. 2014, went mega. 2015, 4 million in the general election, and then when Brexit was delivered, boom, we went back to, I say Brexit, the referendum result was delivered. We went straight back down immediately as soon as the Tories apparently accepted that they would have to deliver it. And so I think we need to recognize where our current vote numbers are coming from. That's the real source of it. That's what it's really about. People identify UKIP with a unique selling point, which is a policy that we have successfully forced other parties, at least ostensibly, to accept and deliver. So that's the source of it. And I think people trying to say, oh, it's because of Tommy this, or it's because of Carl that, or it's because of bad leaflets and all this sort of stuff. Leaflets don't make a huge difference. We got to. By the way, let's talk about the leaflet situation. As we approached the European elections this year, we had probably 3 years to wait before another serious election. And by putting out 27 million leaflets, you've actually harnessed about probably 10 to 15 million quid's worth of postal delivery from the post office. That's what it would cost you to actually get those 27 million leaflets out there. So it had to be done in a hurry. I personally didn't think the leaflet was much good, but then UKIP's put out a lot of rubbish leaflets over the years, so that wasn't a great surprise. And that's something obviously that, if I'm elected, I'm definitely going to fix, because already I'm working on having a design team, but if I've got the authority to do it, then we'll have a fantastic design team, and we'll make sure everybody's leaflets get the treatment so that they communicate well. The message is clear and simple and effective and right, and the design is modern and sensible, and it is a real invitation to read. We'll just make much better leaflets. And so the real criticism there is, well, in fact, if you had the money and you've got the possibility of putting out 27 million leaflets for as little as £500,000 or so, you'd be crazy not to take it, bearing in mind you've got 3 years till the next election. So the decision to actually make a leaflet and get it out by election address, i.e. the post office having to deliver it for us, is an absolute no-brainer. It was the right decision, I think. There was no better way between the beginning of 2019 and the 2022 general election of spending that kind of money, because there was probably no other opportunity to get leaflets to 27 million households.
Yeah, because I don't think I ever got my leaflet, to be honest.
No. Well, what happens is postmen look at it and they go, I'm not delivering that. I hate UKIP, and it goes in the bin. So that's always the way. So I mean, we know from experience that that's been going on for years, and the unions apparently have told postal workers that they don't have to put out leaflets if they don't like the political message, which is, I think, false. I think it's not legal. But anyway, I may be wrong about that. But the problem is it's sort of unpoliceable in a way. But that said, let's say you do a leaflet drop for 27 million people, and let's imagine that half of them get out. Well, you know, you've just sent out 14 million leaflets. You know, there's no way you can send out 14 million leaflets for that little money in any other way. You know, so it's a huge opportunity, the election address. The party needs to capitalize on it much more. And the decision to make an election address there was almost certainly the most powerful and wisest use of the party's money in the 2019 to 2022 election cycle. Now, the leaflet itself, I didn't like it very much. It's not the first time I've looked at a UKIP leaflet and thought, you know, it's more of the same. We need to do better than that. But, you know, as lots of people say, that actually doesn't make a huge difference. You know, it's partly just being seen by your supporters, by voters who think, oh, hang on, what's this? Partly that's what you're paying for. So I don't accept that was a catastrophic decision. The leaflet design was bad. I do accept that, and unfortunately, I was not involved in that, and I'm certain that I could have made it better, as could I think many people. But that's that. What else? How do we get onto this? We're talking about the whole issue of that. Okay, so look, Gerard is not perfect. He's made some decisions. I think what people need to understand is that with hindsight, it's very easy to show decisions wrong, but at the time, if you think about it, you go, well, what did we know at the time? And so when Gerard decided to support Tommy last summer of 2018, he was a political prisoner in this country, in my opinion. And Gerard took a moral decision. Do I support someone who's a political prisoner in the UK? You can argue that now he's no longer a political prisoner because this time he has been rightly convicted. But at least we know that last summer he was wrongly convicted. And I think he was a political prisoner. So I think that decision was a moral decision. And you can argue about whether it's hurt the party. I actually don't think it has hurt the party very much. I think that if you compare our results in 2019 to our results in 2017, there isn't a huge difference. I don't think there's really been a downturn in our actual election results. Obviously, we need to improve. We need to get more votes. But I don't accept this narrative that's being put out there by a lot of people that, oh, we took a wrong direction, and oh, Gerard did stupid things, and oh, the party's doing badly because of that. That's nonsense. It really is nonsense.
Richard, sorry, can I just go first, if that's okay? First of all, Richard Patterson, I'd love to get you in on the next question because we haven't heard from you yet. But before that, I want to ask you, Richard Braine, firstly. You have announced that if you are elected leader, you will make Gerard Batten your deputy. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? And also, what do you make about people who are averse to us talking about issues with Islamic extremism and grooming gangs and things like that?
Well, let's deal with the second issue first. We absolutely must talk about these things. They should not be our number one priority and our main talking point, because there are other very, very serious issues that we need to talk about as a party. But we certainly mustn't shy away from or feel that we should not talk about these issues of balkanization, integration, cultural shifts, demographic shifts, and indeed of, let's say, the conflict between Muslim parents and LGBT, queering the primary school classroom. That content shy away from it. But let's get the balance right. Can you hear me? Is it all going?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. So let's get the balance right there. I think that's the point. Let's not obsess over only this issue. There are many other big issues that we have to deal with. So the first thing is get the balance right. But so that's in no way a retreat. It's simply saying that we've got to try to make sure that we get our policy message and manifesto out there on all of the other issues where we have excellent common sense policies. That's that issue, I think, dealt with. Let's go back to the first issue of Gerard being my deputy. Lots of people are very unhappy about the fact that he's not been able to stand. I think the question of the NEC decision is a complicated one. I think we must be careful not to try to demonize the NEC. And I expect that they will go to, that they will do more to explain their decision, whether it's the right one or wrong one. Really, when I saw that, and as you know, I went ahead to stand because I thought Gerard wasn't going to stand. As soon as Gerard announced that he was standing, I then withdrew because I would support him and vote for him. He's not perfect, but he's actually, I think, been a very good leader, and I have a lot of respect for him. And he's got a lot of experience. He's a real expert on Brexit and how to get that right. He's got principles. I admire him in many ways. So then this issue came up when they stopped him standing, and then said to me, Piers, the interim leader of the party, said to me, well, because you dropped out thinking that Gerard could stand, we're going to let you, we'll give you a couple of days to get your nomination in, if you want to come back in again. And I realized immediately that I needed to do that a few days beforehand. Now the issue of Gerard being deputy leader. So it occurred to me after my nomination went in fact, that this was to some extent a solution to what I regard as something of an insult to Gerard, that the party hasn't let him stand when, after all he's done for the party, 27 years. And partly for me, it's about that. It's about a way of being respectful and decent towards a wonderful man who's given 27 years of his life to this great quest that we're on to try to save our country. So that's part of it. But also, I thought if I could persuade Gerard to be my deputy, then having him on the end of the telephone when I need to speak to him is going to be of very great value. He has all that experience. I want to know that I can call him up if I've got a query. If there's someone maybe I don't know as well as he does, because he's known people for a long time in the party, to ask him questions like that. Questions on Brexit, where he's a really fascinating, he's a real expert on that. His experience in the European Union Parliament and so on. So, his expertise must not be lost. I want to have him there as a team member and someone that I can rely on and call.
Patterson, do you want to jump in with a question?
Yeah, there's some confusion on YI about a comment which was made about Christianity being a death cult too. Yes, I think you've expanded on it a little bit, but I'm just wondering.
I'm going to expand on that. The first thing I want to tell you is that I am a practicing Christian. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is that I defend what I said. If you look at the Oxford Dictionary definition of a cult, you'll see that essentially it means a religion. And Christianity is a religion. I mean, one of you may be in front of a screen now where you can quickly look up for us the Oxford Dictionary definition of a cult. But the number one meaning of a cult is a system of religious observance with an object of divinity. Essentially it pretty much describes what a religion is. So I see the words religion and cult as sometimes, not always, but sometimes being commensurate or meaning the same thing more or less. So that's why I've got no problem with anybody saying to me that I belong to a cult. I accept that I do belong to a cult. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable use of the word. If you look up the origin of the word cult, you will find that it actually does come from, culture and cultus, Latin cultus, and it does really mean a religious movement or group.
I think
So-
in that instance, for most people, they'd assume that a cult is a religion, but it has a sort of an antisocial or almost like a violent or controlling aspect to it. And you may be completely right in terms of the strict definition, but when most people hear cult, they know a clear distinction between the religious aspect and the dominating, demanding, violent aspect, which you would see with what's a good example?
So let me try and finish this. So I have a bad habit of using words in their, historic sense. I did English literature at school. I quite often use words. I don't have a problem, for instance, with the word bastard being used to describe someone whose parents weren't married. That to me is simply what the word means. And there's two ways of using the word. There's the modern sense where it's gathered a lot of baggage, or there's the original sense as it appears in, let's say, King Lear with Edgar, Edmund the bastard, who refers to himself as a bastard because he is a bastard. Of course, it turns out that Edmund is a bastard in both senses of the word. But but the point is that he uses it in the sense of someone whose parents were not married. It's that simple. Now, and I do this a lot, and it's one of the confusions of language that words have multiple meanings.
They certainly do, Richard. They certainly do.
They have,
I think he's cut out Tad there.
Nebulous meanings.
I think he's driven under a tunnel.
And a lot of confusion between people. Sorry, say that. Say again,
have you
please.
returned to us?
We've got you back now. Keep on talking. Please talk.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay, great. So, so a lot of confusion in this world happens because when people use words, one person treats the word as meaning one thing, and the other person thinks the word means something else. And when you look up,
it's a nice little phrase we've got in there.
Words in dictionaries. 1, 2, 3. Sorry, say again.
Sorry, you
can you hear me?
You keep cussing out, and we're getting some rather entertaining freeze frames when you cuss out.
I'm sorry about that. Bad tech, boomer tech. Now, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Can you hear us?
I love our streams.
Can you hear me
Braine.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, go, Lambeth, go along the rows.
I think
can
we're
you hear me
going for
now?
the Braine.
Live from Lambeth. Tell us your thoughts, Richard.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I mean, I did.
We can hear you.
Sorry, yeah. So that's the cult side of it. So I don't have a problem with cult being used in the original sense. Equally, when it comes to the question of a death cult, look, when I go to church, there's a large painting of suffering. Christ suffered and was executed. He was executed, and then the resurrection, the miracle occurs. The point is that death and resurrection is very central to the Christian iconography. It's very central to the Christian message. It's very central. Can you hear me?
Well, yeah, I can hear you. Just to give some context to that, I believe what you were talking about, which was actually leaked from the WhatsApp group to the YI Hub, is a comment where you basically, I think, defended Gerard when he said Islam is a death cult by saying Christianity is also a death cult. That's basically what you said, isn't it?
Yes. Now, wait a second. So obviously, they're very different death cults. Okay, so Christianity is a death cult, a religion that is concerned with the death of Jesus Christ and his resurrection. So death is very much at the center of the Christian story, and the conquest over death is the center of the story. Now, in Islam, it's very different. Islam, I think when Gerard said that, he was referring obviously to a totally different narrative, a totally different history. For instance, we know that in the Quran, the punishment for apostates is execution, also for homosexuality, arguably. There's quite a few things you can do in in Islam that demand that your peers execute you as punishment. So you can argue from that point of view it's a death cult. If you go online, you can actually, and I don't recommend doing this, but you can go onto YouTube and actually see footage of Muslims stoning people who have transgressed in some way or other. And obviously we don't need to go into Lee Rigby and the Manchester Arena attack and countless other, obviously there is a large terrorism problem primarily within Islam. And so I'm certain that is the sense in which Gerard was speaking. So I think, the comment is justifiable. And when Gerard says it is one, he may be being blunt and perhaps not even very polite. But he's pretty knowledgeable, and I'm pretty certain that he's referring to this issue. In the history of the 1400-year history of Islam, it's reckoned that probably about 300 million people have died as a result of conquest and the jihad itself, the holy war, and so. Tell the truth. People may not like things we say. People may get offended. But
Richard, can I cut you off just there?
There's a sense in which that comment is justified as well. So,
Richard, can I stop you there very quickly? You cut off there just as you said so. So can you carry on from when you said so?
I can't remember when I said so. But
just quickly, chap, I have to love you and leave you. Been a pleasure.
All right, see you, Seb.
Okay, bye.
Cheers, good to see you, Seb.
Bye.
All right, I got a quick fire question if you want me to jump off.
Oh well, let's just can you just say the last bit of what you said, Richard? Because I think a lot of people will be interested to hear that properly.
Yes, essentially talking about what Gerard was. I talking about what Gerard when Gerard said the death cult comment. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, you're basically the difference between Islam and Christianity as well.
Yes, with Christianity, it's a death cult on account of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ being absolutely central part of the culture and the story and the whole religious and the whole divine question. Now, in Islam, it's a death cult for a different reason, in the sense that Gerard used it, which is that through its 1400-year history, probably they reckon that maybe about 300 million people have died as a result of jihad and holy war, and also we know that in the Quran, arguably the punishment for, let's say, homosexuality.
Well, no offense to you, Richard, but you did actually just say that a minute ago.
I did. Sorry, I did just say what?
What the 300 million and the thing afterwards. It was the very end bit which I was after. We actually heard that bit.
Okay. Interesting. I can't remember. I can't remember what I got to. I mean, don't forget for apostasy also. I think I know what I was talking about. If you go on YouTube, there are videos of people being religiously stoned in Muslim communities, and indeed of people being thrown off buildings and so on. This is peer group punishment, according to Sharia law, possibly in some versions of Islam, certainly justified through Scripture and the Quran. And so, so there are several ways in which I think you can say that Gerard's comments, highlight something important and are justified. And he is blunt in defending what he said, but I think that many people recognize that, he's got a point.
Yeah, and I think also there are sects of the Muslim community, such as the Sufis and also the Ahmadiyas, who are actually quite against the violent aspects of Islam and denounce that side of it. So it's not just we're attacking Islam totally on this, is it?
Well, no, but also you need to recognize what the Islamic scripture says. Don't forget verse Surah 6, 115 says that no man can change the word of Allah which obviously the Quran is, and so that pretty much rules out sort of reform in the sense of reform of the scripture. And then if you look at, let's say, Surah 47 verse 4, it says when you meet the infidel, smite them at the neck until many are dead and wounded, tie bonds on the rest. Allah could have punished them himself, but he sets it as a test of you. And those are just two verses. I mean, there's 839, there's 533. There are many other verses that where Allah licenses or even commands the faithful to be violent or even to execute. And so I think you can't, and look at the Ahmadiyas. We've got this wonderful chap, Asad Shah, in Glasgow, I think it was, who tweeted, Happy Easter to my Christian customers. And two boys from Bradford went up there and stabbed him in the head 31 times.
Damn.
And the BBC, when they heard that a Muslim had been stabbed in the head, they put up a news story on their website. And then about 5 hours later, when they heard that he'd actually been stabbed by other Muslims, two boys from Bradford went up there. They then took the story down because it didn't fit. What they were really hoping is that it was going to be an example of far-right violence against Muslims, and they had assumed that was the case and discovered that it wasn't. And then 3 days later, on the Wednesday, and I remember this very well because that happened on the Sunday or the Saturday or Sunday. On the Wednesday, the Muslim Council of Great Britain issued a statement pointing out that Ahmadiyas are not real Muslims.
Yeah, very interesting.
So I think that is very interesting because essentially it seems that they were, I think there's a sense that you could argue that they were suggesting that these lads from Bradford who did that were, in some ways observant.
Yeah. I think we're going to have some quick fire questions for you now, Richard, if that's okay.
Yeah, fine, great.
I actually have one myself from my friend Othi, who's also in UKIP.
Yeah.
He said, what are your policies on education? And also, if you were elected as Prime Minister, what would your first act be?
Wow, good questions. On education, look at the manifesto. It's pretty good on that. I firmly agree with the STEM, the rules on STEM, removing the the tutorial fees on STEM subjects. We need to try to redress the balance towards the scientific, mathematical, and technical subjects because they have proved, in the past to be, to make people very employable and to help, build business and industry and all those things. So I think we lost, we've allowed too much artistic and art side education. People want to do it because it's easier,
It's more fun.
It's more fun. But the problem is that in many ways it's not as successful in education. And people who can study maths and scientific and vocational subjects, they should be encouraged to do so. We also have this thing about technical colleges, and we certainly need more of them because there's a lot of people that can get vocational trainings. They may not be brilliant academics, but they can get very good vocational trainings. And we've really, we've sort of dropped the ball on that in this country over the last, well, certainly 50 years, and that's a real shame. So we need to get better at that. What else can I talk to you quickly about education? Well, I think those are the obvious ones. Obviously, the Labour idea that we want 50% of people to go to university is nonsense, and basically it's been done for the sake of political indoctrination. And I went to a very interesting talk by Roger Scruton about a month ago, where after he had been sacked from his university for not being left-wing enough, and he said, what can we do? And he said, one argument is that you just don't go to university because it's the only way to avoid, not going to university is the only way to avoid this sort of brainwashing. Sorry, I just got to speak. We need to turn around. Sorry. So that's that. He also mentioned the idea of having privately funded universities so that the state couldn't interfere in the education, and I'm keen on that. One scheme and an idea that I actually think is a brilliant idea to solve a lot of our education problems is the idea that you give parents a voucher, redeemable at schools and colleges, to the value that the state normally pays, so that parents decide at which institution the state money gets paid for their child's education. So you're putting the power and the choice back in the hands of the parents that has been taken away from them. And I think that is actually an idea that really could have legs, and really open up the education market, because we know that independent schools in this country have, many of them have very high standards. There are some very good state schools as well, but certainly people have a higher expectation of independent schools. So if you could put more power in the hands of the parents and allow them to top up the state contribution, then I think that would be that could be quite transformative, and could move a lot of our schools up the scale. But we already have, don't forget, our independent school market is huge, and people come from all over the world to be educated here. So we have a great model, and really what we need to do is see if we can move some of the less good state schools in that direction somehow, to achieve those sorts of, approach those sorts of standards. That's education. The other question was, what would I do the first thing if I became Prime Minister? First thing I'd do is have a cold beer. A cold beer. I think, look, obviously, if that happens, you're going to have to, you've got your cabinet plans. You're going to be busy. Your feet's not going to touch the ground if that happens to you. You won't have time to think. So, what would I do? You're getting your cabinet organized. You've got your policy, your manifesto platform that you're trying to push out. I don't think you have time to think. When you look at how rapidly people seem to age in the job of Prime Minister, they seem to have lived, they look like they've lived 3 years for every 1 year that they've been in the job. And the reason is simple. You don't get enough time, you don't get enough sleep, and you have to work phenomenally hard and really pace yourself and be very, very efficient. So, what would I do? Have a beer, catch my breath, and then get stuck straight back in, get on the phone, and just get calling and talking all day, every day, to make sure that your policy platform actually gets delivered.
And cut immigration in half.
Well, certainly, I mean, that is a UKIP policy. I mean, one of the things that I was having this conversation earlier about this question, ostensibly, or people say, oh, well, migrants to this country, immigrants are a benefit to this country if they earn more than £28,000. I don't believe that is a genuine threshold. My suspicion is that it is far, far higher than that. And one of the reasons is that economists are not very good at measuring, the not strictly, grocer's shop aspects of political moves and demographic changes and all of these things. They're constantly surprised. Economists are always a step behind. And I suspect that if you really accounted for all of the costs of large numbers of people coming into your country, then there's several costs that are not being included in that figure. Balkanization, cultural divisions.
You can't only look at it as a case of economics. There's far more to migration than GDP and net figures and what people do or don't contribute financially. Absolutely.
And look at so much of the planning fails because look at the grooming gang situation as an example of this. It wasn't those who took the decisions to have hundreds of thousands, millions of Pakistani Muslims come into this country. They may not have been aware that would become a phenomenon. They may not have been aware that that was going to be an issue. In other words, there are risks and hidden costs that we just don't no, because immigration is, it has these hidden costs that we don't factor in. So yes, when it comes to first policies to get really up and running, and by the way, I think one of the key things about this is that the most important thing, again coming down to the question of technology and what we can do with technology now, is one of the most important things that it possibly could be, is to get a lot more strict, as the US is, on recording biometric data of the people who come in, so that we really can properly distinguish, wherever necessary, between those who are from this country and have a right to welfare and all of the great benefits of being British, and those who don't have that right and who are visitors and who should have medical insurance to make sure they're covered while they're here, and who, for instance, have maybe 3-month work permits or whatever, and should be sent home to their countries, so that the British people don't end up picking up the tab for the welfare of the world.
Would you favour an ID card scheme?
No, so what I'm suggesting is the opposite. In other words, only British people wouldn't need ID cards. Now you can say, oh, well, that wouldn't work. But the point is that with the database tech that we have now, you could have it so that, at let's say, I don't know, when people are collecting welfare, or when people are applying for housing, or when people are going to a hospital, or applying to send their children to a school or whatever it is, that to do that, you would have to submit yourself biometrically, and if you were a visitor, you would be on the visitor database.
Well, if Boris gets his plan, he'll naturalize everybody anyway.
Sorry, say again. Yeah, that's right. But I mean, I think, and I don't agree with that. But the problem really here is actually a question of implementation. It's a question of, can you actually make people accountable to the law? And it seems to me that the obvious immediate solution to this is that we need to treat much more seriously the issue of keeping a record of those who are not entitled. That's the start. So everybody coming into the country who doesn't hold a British passport or has a right to residency and so on, must be recorded, fingerprints, iris scans, hair samples, so that we can actually have a proper record of the people who are not entitled. And because they're not British citizens, we don't forget that, part of the way the special relationship works is that, we spy on the Yanks for the Yanks and they spy on the Brits for the Brits. And why? Because they're not subject to the law in that regard, and nor are we. This country is not bound by the US Constitution. So, that seems to me to be, there's some evidence that is the arrangement. And this is the point, that when visitors are visitors, you can argue that this country doesn't owe them necessarily the same rights as it owes British people. So let's not have ID cards for British people. Let's have ID cards for visitors.
Yeah,
very
I can get behind that.
Michael, do you have some quick fire questions for us?
I have one personal question. I'm not sure if you could answer the second one because of the technicalities involved. But the first one was from a YouTube comment, and it is, what's your view on anti-white racism in the country? Because there's one rule for one group and one rule for another going on at the moment.
Absolutely. I mean, look, we've seen many institutions. I mean, Transport for London. I think National Trust or Heritage, whatever it was, but certainly, BBC even advertising jobs and saying, BAME only. And I've had this conversation before. The thing to do is send in a job application and call yourself a very far-flung foreign name, and turn up. And when they see that you are a white British person, simply say, I identify as Angolan. And then see where that gets you. And I think we know where it gets you, but it makes the point that this is racist. This is very, very public racism, literally discrimination against British people. And that's just the tip of an iceberg, I think. I think we're seeing, I think that is a phenomenon which exists on quite a big scale. And something, we need to redress that balance. We need to bring attention to it. The first thing is we need to explain to a lot of middle class white British people that they are anti-white British racists, because many of them think that they are, absolutely perfectly virtuous individuals. And they actually don't, probably many of them recognize that they have patronizingly different standards for white people and non-white people.
I think class plays quite an important role. Jon Snow on Channel 4, when he referred to white people, I think he really meant working class people.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we've seen all this far right. I mean, I've said this a few times, but when they're talking about far right, what they really mean is working class, I should say. So I totally agree with that. But I think that it is working. I think working class white people in this country have actually had a very bad ride these last few decades because of immigration, because of the EU. I think it's been very unfair. And of course, don't forget, we've got this situation where so many training colleges charge 4 times as much to foreign students coming to take up places. And so they prefer that because they'd rather get paid 4 times as much. And so, we've actually neglected training. We've made it more difficult for, white British people to get, good high level training and all of that. So, I think that we generally have a society where there is actually now significant prejudice against, native British people. And, I think about where that heads ultimately with the demographics. And, you look, I used to travel across the States for pleasure by delivering cars, just to explore. And I've been on several, we used to say Native American. I mean, when I was a child, people used to say Red Indian. But now I think that the correct term is First Nation Americans. I'm trying to keep up. I'm trying to keep up with the ever-changing rules about how you say racist things. But First Nation Americans and some of those reserves, and it is really depressing. These are people that I suppose their culture is gone, and they are kind of like farm animals. They have a lot of booze and gambling problems. Sorry, I'm just giving directions. And then, oh no, you can't. Sorry about this. I'm trying to direct. Do you turn here? That's the sort of horrifying future dystopia for British people if it carries on like this, because because I think there's I don't think that we're going to see the same anti-racist attitudes of the white British middle class amongst other people, particularly immigrant communities. We know that we don't. Look at Diane Abbott. Look at Lammy. There's plenty of people who if you go online, you go onto Twitter, go onto Facebook, you'll find plenty of people being very openly racist towards white people. White people are scum, all this sort of stuff. And that's absolutely fine. No one blinks an eye. No one does anything about it. It's not regarded as racism. You've actually seen people saying, white people can't be I'm black, I can't be racist. And Candace Ernst has made this point. So yeah, that's it. I think it's a phenomenon. I think it exists. I think it's real. I think it's very pervasive. I think it is. It's at its worst amongst white middle class people who think that they can somehow signal their exoticism by actually being negative towards particularly working class people of their own race.
Yeah, even the terminology is subversive, because none of the other racism is anti-black racism or anti-Chinese racism. It's just racism. So the only racism that we differ in terms of language is anti-white racism or reverse racism, when essentially it's just racism.
That's right. Yeah, it is just racism. But I think the fact that, when you describe it as anti-white racism, I think the point is that, that smashes this idea that that phenomenon doesn't exist.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Does that make sense? In other words, I think it's surprising to people that, that you can actually discuss that phenomenon. There's a lot of people out there who think, white people are racist, non-white people aren't.
Yeah. I used to get peddled a lot of that when I was in secondary school.
Us honkies have got to stick together,
All right. The one thing I was going to ask, and this was going back to when we were talking about Jared Batten. I don't know how much detail you're allowed to go into this because of all the things that's going on, but we're told that the ballot papers are meant to be coming through next week sometime, or this week sometime, I should be saying. But to my knowledge, Jared Batten's lawsuit against the NEC is currently in full swing. And I'm just curious, because the intention of it was to halt the election and to essentially start again to put Jared on it. But it seems the NEC are reluctant to do that, or they're just going to carry on anyway. And I was just wondering if you had any insight into it.
Well, first of all, let me just correct something you said, because it's important to correct it. You said Gerard Batten's lawsuit. Now, it's definitely not Gerard Batten's lawsuit. He knows probably as little about it as I do. Which means not very much. It has been brought by members who are obviously supportive of Gerard, but it's not been brought by Gerard or by me, and I've had no involvement. I haven't supported it, so that's one point to clarify.
Okay.
The second point about ballot papers, the answer is I don't. As I understand it, I had a conversation with peers today, and it looks like ballot papers are going out regardless. So, so it looks like they're not going to pay much heed to the efforts by this legal movement to try to get Gerard back onto the ballot paper. It looks like they're going to just soldier on and ignore it. That looks like what's going to happen now. And where that takes us in the future, I have no idea. I am not a lawyer. I'm not involved in this project. I don't know where it takes us. I don't know.
Well, it's certainly going to make a lot of people upset and unhappy, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that it's very, very divisive and disruptive. I think it will be a disaster for the party if we have a serious lawsuit over this. But, I would say this, that I still cling to the principle that the members should decide who leads the party, not effectively, 10 people, whatever it was in the NEC. The NEC obviously does have a duty to the company, to ensure that things are done properly. You can probably argue forever about the decision in this case. It may be that the NEC provide us soon with a clearer description of why they made this decision. And it may be that some people will be satisfied by that and say, okay, fair enough. That's perhaps not impossible. I think it's a great insult. I think it's a great shame. What can I say? I think I've made myself clear on the subject.
Yeah.
Look, there's another issue here, which is that, it could be that it is simply a symptom of the fact that something that I used to talk about back in 2016, that because UKIP was the party of Brexit, it actually brought people from all walks of life. UKIP was a broader church, possibly, than other parties. With the Tories, you can argue that there's the working class Tory thing, and that is big, certainly. But I think that with UKIP, you had people, a bit like the Brexit Party has had recently, you had people come from all directions. People joined the party from Labour, from Lib Dems, from Tories, obviously. People even joined in the old days the party from further to the right and further to the left, communists and BNP and so on. So it was a broad church, and I think to some extent, you talked about class. Is it Richard? Yeah, you talked about class. To some extent, this chasm between two sides of the party, may to some extent come down to class lines. That the Tommy supporters are, generally tend to be working class, and the Gerard supporters, are working class, and on the other hand, the people that are concerned that the party's reputation is being sullied, maybe perhaps more middle class sort of people.
So, Richard, I have to pin you down on that very quickly, because this is something which I get accused of talking too much in a class way, as if it's not a valid point. But I actually do believe there is a lot of snobbery in certain parts of the middle class. And I do feel like there isn't a party which fully represents the working class on a big scale. And that's why I'm really passionate about UKIP being the voice for the working class. However, if Gerard is not able to stand, I feel like a lot of the working class, like you say, will be deflated by that and feel like, oh, UKIP isn't for the working class. So what do you say to that?
Well, I think I agree with you. I think that the Tories illustrate sometimes, occasionally, that you can appeal across classes. And I think that when that happens in the Tory party, it's a good thing. I think in the Labour Party, we know that we've got our wonderful middle class leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, who was privately educated and didn't get very good results out of that, by the way. Was born in a pretty cushy middle class, and in fact, I suppose if you want to go to that sort of detail, upper middle class, if you can still use that sort of language, background. And there's, look at Tony Benn, gave up his title, to be a raving Marxist. Che Guevara was a doctor's son, so I think on the Labour side, you've got that class divide as well. The problem with Labour is, of course, that the Labour policy and the connection with Marxism and socialism has damaged this country's industrial base and economic situation quite badly. You can argue that the Tories have brought damage too, and I'm sure there's still lots of people in mining towns who spit at the name of Margaret Thatcher. But yeah, I think, look, that you can't. I mean, the class divisions are always going to be there. In the old days, we used to say rags to rags in 3 generations. And you think of Henry VIII appointing his publican as the Lord Chancellor, the most senior man in the country. In many ways, perhaps unlike the caste system in India, the British class system has always allowed a significant amount of mobility. And I think that is a story that isn't often told. And if you look at old cartoons drawn 100 or 200 years ago at the races, there's endless comment about class. And here's the chap in the top hat and the tails, but you can see he's come from the bottom and he's worked his way up, And in some ways, it should be like that. In some ways, that mobility is important, that people can strive and they can seize opportunity. And they can better themselves, and they can afford things, and and afford to send their children to posh schools and hang out with other people who've made good and so on. That I think that's a natural part of a society. Can UKIP appeal across all classes? Yes, I think it can. Gerard, someone who grew up in the East End of London. The trade and business spokesman was William Dartmouth, who's basically aristocracy. Unfortunately, he left us. He did quite well out of being an MEP, but I don't see why a party can't successfully span that divide. In other words, I don't think that parties need to have class associations. And I think, I was talking earlier about the Boomer Millennial Alliance. What you really want actually is what, to some extent, you see in the old world is an alliance between the classes. And there were landed gentry and people that owned coal mines who really looked after their workforce and really loved them, and actually produced a quite a harmonious society, built schools, housed the workers well, and I think that is a great British tradition as well. You look at Shaftesbury and all of that, So yeah, I don't see why UKIP can't span the class divide, because at the end of the day, our patriotism should draw us together. And I think the only fly in that ointment is Marxism, which attempts to set classes against each other to produce class war. And so if you have a non-Marxist party that can represent both working class and middle class concerns, united by patriotism and the belief that working together will be successful and the best outcome for all of us, then yeah, why not?
I'd like to jump in on something you said earlier and your general point there, to actually add something. I've been looking over the Lord Ashcroft poll that was done right after the 2019 EU elections, the MEP elections. And if you actually look, we did lose a lot of votes. I think every single vote that UKIP lost went to the Brexit Party. But if you actually look a little bit closer, you can notice that we actually drew a lot of votes as well. We gained quite a few from across the stream, pretty much equally. We drew from Conservatives, from Labour, from Greens. We drew from pretty much all the parties, including our own core base, a whole bunch of votes. And I thought it would be interesting to note that, the fact that even in what people have called our darkest times, we drew votes.
Yes, but also don't forget that the numbers here and even the polling, what quite often happens is a whole load of people migrate from party A to party B, and then a whole load of people migrate from party B to party C. And everybody makes the assumption that people have migrated from party A to party C.
Yeah.
So be very careful of those sorts of numbers. We've seen this in the 2017 general election, where there's a lot of bollocks talked about how people were moving this way and that way. There's a lot of stuff about, UKIP voters all went to vote for Tories or Labour, whatever it was, and it was all, and it was fanciful. We need to accept that, for instance, there was a poll in this middle of the week where you saw a 2% increase for the Liberal Dems, and you saw a 2% drop for Brexit Party. That's not the latest poll, that was earlier in the week. But are we seriously suggesting that 2% shift was people going from Brexit Party to Lib Dems? No, of course it wasn't. It was people going from Brexit Party to Tories, and it was Tories going to the Lib Dems. And it looked like the Tories were just treading water, but in fact they had a significant shift. And it's a bit like the net immigration lie that is peddled by the media all the time. You could have 30 million people come into this country and 30 million people leave this country, and they'd tell you that the net immigration figure is 0. Well, that's not what you'd see on the streets. And what you'd see on the streets is a total transformation of the country. And so, to a smaller extent, don't forget that when you look at these analyses of how voters are shifting, be skeptical, apply very critical thinking to it. Make sure that you look at the numbers carefully, and also look at how the polling has been done. Make sure it's a big enough sample. Make sure that the questions that they asked weren't designed to produce a particular answer, because usually they were.
Well, it looks like you've arrived at your destination, Richard.
Yeah.
So did you want to maybe give us...
I haven't actually, we're lost, but
oh, really?
my very wonderful and loving and patient wife is quite quietly waiting for her stupid husband to get his act together.
Richard, can I ask one quick question?
Yeah.
We were at the Wakefield hustings. I was the gent who challenged Ben Walker on radical Christianity.
Yes.
So I like holding people's feet to the fire. So one thing I've been asked to ask you is, if you are voted leader, how can you assure us that with Batten as deputy, that the tail won't be wagging the dog, so to speak?
In what sense? In what sense do you mean that? In other words, you're suggesting that somehow I'm going to be a puppet to Gerard Batten?
Yeah, no, that's it. It's just to point out how you would just ensure people that it was your direction and your drive that was moving the party forward, rather than Batten sort of in the wings.
Well, I mean, I seldom disagree very much with Gerard. I mean, I think the only times I disagree with him are, or occasionally, but generally questions of style. So, you know, so for instance, when he's challenged on having called Islam a death cult, I think that my answer would be, well, you know, let's look at the history, let's go into the details, let's look at what the scripture says, you know, and let's look at the current numbers. You know, last year 11,000 people killed in Islamic violent attacks across the world in over 50 countries. You know, let's actually answer the questions and go into it. Whereas Gerard just goes, it is one. And, you know, in a way, you know, that's one of the things that's so refreshing about him, is that he's determined to speak the truth very bluntly and very succinctly. But I suppose my style would be different, and I try to go to greater lengths to justify it, so that maybe I tried to explain myself a bit better, perhaps. So I think, you know, there's a style difference there. I mean, look, I don't think that you're going to find that Gerard is going to want to run the party in that kind of way, you know, by running a puppet. He's quite a sort of all or nothing person. If he can't be leader, then I suspect he will enjoy his retirement and be available for a phone call or two in, you know, when I need to speak to him. Yeah. But I think you'll find that he'll have you know, he'll be very pleased to be retired and getting on with his life. So I wouldn't worry about that. I don't think you're going to find him trying to come in and sort of, you know, run the party from the background. I mean, I think that there are other people who have far more. If you're worried about people running the party, you know, from the background, then Gerard shouldn't be the suspect that you're worried about. I think that there are other forces that possibly have undue influence over the party. I'm obviously talking about Farage. I'm also talking about the establishment and the way power is used and distributed in the establishment, the EU, the state, our intelligence services, moles from different political parties. There are lots and lots of ways that you can, you know, consider UKIP to face a great struggle for its independence as a party, let alone UK's independence as a country. And I don't think Gerard is one of those dark forces that's going to come and cause problems. I think there are others. Get worried about the others first.
So to finish up then, do you want to give us a quick 30-second minute pitch as for why you will be the best leader UKIP has ever had?
Yeah, well, okay. First of all, I've got pretty clear plans about how we're going to use technology to get the party working much, much more efficiently. And they're doable plans. They're plans that can be done one step at a time. So that's important, because in fact we are, you know, we've got a great manifesto. We've got wonderful people. Look at the people in the party, you know, really fantastic. And so we've got so much going for us as a party. And I think that one of the reasons we're failing is we're not getting our message out there. We're not communicating properly internally. And I think that you can actually build technical solutions to solve those problems, so that we do a much better job of presenting ourselves, that we communicate much better with each other, and we will grow and learn and get more professional as a result. And I think that we can seriously grow our vote share as a result of that. The other candidates in the hustings you will have seen kept banging on about, oh, grassroots this and grassroots that. But as far as I could work out, they didn't seem to present any real tangible methods for achieving that grassroots transformation. You know, they don't seem to have a model in their minds of how you actually give the grassroots that power. You know, Ben talks about how, oh, the central party is going to shower the branches with money. What money? You know, it doesn't work like that. You know, that is pie in the sky. You know, so, and Mike talking about common sense policies. Well, I'll tell you what, Mike, we've got common sense policies. We've got a great manifesto packed with common sense policies. And what we really need to do is actually get on television and defend that manifesto, and not go on television and say, oh, well, I don't agree with that one, and I don't agree with that one. So we've got great policies. We've got a great political philosophy in the party. So that's the issue. So the real issue is actually we're communicating poorly. We need to get better at communicating. I am actually able to solve that problem from a technical point of view. I understand the nature of the problem. and I understand the kinds of tools and steps that you have to take to fix it. So that's why give me the authority, put me in power in the party, make me the leader, so that I can actually make the changes that need to be made, so that we all start actually pulling together and being efficient. And I think that we possibly are working at a 5% efficiency at the moment.
So join the brainwave.
That's it. The brainwave is going to make the party 50% efficient instead of 5% efficient. So we'll get 10 times the bang for our buck. And I think that it could really transform the fortune of the party.
Fantastic. Thanks for speaking to us, Richard. And
it's a real pleasure as always. I'm sorry for the technical issues. I'm sorry for my battery going down, low bandwidth, and all of the other problems. But if you've got any other questions, do email me, text me, tweet me, whatever it is. Get at me however you want. ukip@braine.com, and get in touch with me, and I'll try to answer them the best I can.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Braine.
Thanks a lot, Kat. Great to speak. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.